friends, today I'm gonna do my February and March wrap up. So I probably could have stretched this wrap up for a little bit longer because I only read 2 novels and everything else that I read was poetry collections. But because in April I am participating in the Owls, I thought that it would probably be smart for me to just wrap up everything that I've read before that, because I do hope to read at least 5 actual novels during April. So I thought I'll wrap everything up before that, and then hopefully from April on, we can go back to regular wrap-ups. I don't know. It's just with everything going on right now and just not knowing where things are going to go, not knowing anything, it's just kind of hard for me to, and for a lot of us obviously, to anticipate, what's going to happen, how much reading am I going to get done, how much time will I have to film. So it's hard for me to talk about, I hope to get back into this and into that, and I don't really know. These are just the hopes that I have. I just hope that, just being in self-isolation right now will, bring me back into all these routines that I then somehow am still able to, have even when I go back to work. But we'll see about that. For now, I will talk about everything that I've read in February and March, and usually I really, really like to do things chronologically, but I read 1 novel in the beginning of February and then 1 novel at the end of March. And so because I know that a lot of people will not really be interested in me talking about poetry collections, I just thought I'll talk about the 2 novels at first, and then I will talk about the poetry collections so that everybody who's not interested in that can just click off. Again, especially because it's there's 4 or 5 poetry collections in between those 2 novels. I just thought it's smarter for me to do it like that. So the first book that I want to talk about is The Shadows Between Us by Trisha Levenseller. This was actually an arc that I had. The first arc that I requested and basically immediately read, and even read before publishing date, wow, which didn't end up doing much considering I didn't put a review out for this before the release date, which definitely sucks and is something that I should be better about. I'm very good about not requesting arcs if I'm not sure that I'm going to read them, but I should make sure that my reviews go up in time as well. So now I am sitting here and it's been 2 months since I read this book and I have no review, so I have no idea about the specifics and what I really enjoyed about this book. But I did really, really enjoy it. I think that it is a book that many people who enjoy your very usual YA fantasy will enjoy as well. I think that it delivers a lot of the tropes that we know and love and are used to. The biggest one in this one is definitely enemies to lovers, but then I think that it also offers some unique takes. And it is definitely one of those YA fantasies that very heavily focuses on the romance. So I will say that. So if you're not someone who is into these fantasy romances that we find a lot in YA, then this is probably not the book for you. If you are someone like me who loves that a lot, who actually loves when fantasy novels kind of, very much focus and revolve around the romance, then I think this is the right book for you. Again, it is the enemies to lovers trope, and it is about a girl who decides to marry the Shadow King, who is the king of this kingdom, and he is, he has these shadows around him that kind of protect him and basically make him invincible. And she decides to, try and woo him and marry him so that she can eventually kill him and become the queen. And so that is kind of where we start the storyline. And then eventually, obviously, you can expect that from a book like this. She does, develop feelings for him, and she kind of cracks through the shell that he has around him as well, apart from the actual physical shadows around him. And so I just really, really liked that concept. I really like the development of the romance, and I think this is just one of those books where you could tell, to me it felt that way anyway, you could tell that the author was very aware that this book was going to be centered around the romance. So it never tried to hide that fact. So it wasn't a book where you felt like a lot of the things were lacking because the romance was only in the center, but it just felt like from the beginning on it was clear that this was very much going to focus on the romance. And I think that that was one of the huge pros of this book. You could just tell that, and it felt okay because you kind of realized immediately going into it, just even from the synopsis, that this is what this book was going to deal with. And I just think that the book benefited from that so much, because I love the romance. This was one of my favorite YA romances that I have read in a really, really long time. And I just think that it was overall really well done. I think that there was a lot of time taken for this all to develop, for these characters to develop feelings for each other, to develop like being together and stuff like that. And I just think that the pacing was incredibly well done. Everything surrounding this, you know, main focus of the story was also well done. I did think that there was a little bit lacking as far as the world building goes. We never really, I guess, understand this world. Like, it's not that it's complicated, it's just that there is not really an explanation for how this whole world works and why there is a king that has these shadows around him. They just exist. If you can live with that, you know, as I could, like, it doesn't really bother me personally or does anything for my enjoyment, but I just think that that is definitely one of the aspects where, looking at it from a more objective point of view, I'm kind of like, okay, but we never really got an explanation for the magic that actually exists in this world. Like, that's kind of the problem. Like, we don't really know the ins and outs of the magic that exists, because it kind of seems like there is no magic in this world except there is a king that has these shadows that surround him, you know? So that was kind of the one issue that I could really see with it. Overall, I just very much enjoyed it. I, again, thought the romance was super well done and just a lot of time was focused on it. And the main character was fucking awesome. Like, she was a Slytherin through and through, and it was also very, like, sex positive. It was very, you know, like, it's totally fine and okay to just, like, you know, have several, like, partners, to not be romantically involved with people that you sleep with, which I think is really, really important to have in your YA books as well. And I just think that it was just an incredibly enjoyable read that, again, offered a lot of usual things that you will probably enjoy if you enjoy YA fantasy with a focus on romance, but then also definitely offered some unique things. And so I would really, really recommend it if you like these kinds of things. And I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. And then the novel that I read at the end of March was The Unhandy Magus by Christina Lauren. I listened to the audiobook of this, which I very much enjoyed. I can definitely recommend the audiobook for this. I just feel like I just don't vibe with Christina Lauren. Now, it's been a while since I read a romance book, an adult romance book, so it was kind of a little bit like out of my comfort zone for me. It's harder for me to get back into an adult romance than it is for me to get back into a YA fantasy, which is just something that I've been reading for years and that I just feel very comfortable with. With adult romance, it can be a little bit tricky. So I definitely even needed like 2 tries to actually get into this book. But then once I had started it, I really got into it and listened to it in one day. And I like had a good experience. Obviously, I feel like it's always a good sign when you finish something in one day. Like, obviously it kept me engaged enough this whole time for me to be able to finish it in one day. But I just think that nothing about it was really exciting. I didn't really feel a lot towards the characters. I didn't really feel a lot towards their romance. And I just think for it being an adult romance book, that there wasn't enough development. Like, I just didn't really feel much towards the relationship that was kind of developing between these two. And so it was just kind of like okay for me overall. I really just don't think Christina Lauren is for me. I think this is the 3rd book that I read by them, and I think that this is one of the most popular books and one of the books that like most people like really, really enjoy out of all of their works. And like, this is the 3rd book that I just felt very, very okay about. I mean, this was probably, for me as well, the best of the books that I've read by them, but like still just an okay experience. So I don't really know if I'm going to read anything else from Christina Lauren. This was okay for me. But I just think that if you read a lot of adult romance, I just don't think, like, I just think there's much better stuff out there. And I haven't even read that much adult romance, you know? So yeah, it was okay. Gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Now let's get into the poetry collections that I read. The first one is actually one that I had a physical copy of because I, you know, was browsing in a bookstore and the cover just spoke to me. I talked about this in my book haul and talked a little bit about how I was feeling a little bit apprehensive about picking it up as well, but only after I had bought it. But that is The Truth About Magic by Atticus. This is actually an Instagram poet, which just reading that made me cringe a little bit. And then I read reviews and it was kind of just seeing that people were, not really loving this one, kind of saying that it is just very generic, that there's like sexist stuff in there and just not many good things. I have to say, okay, first of all, let me point out, I think that so many of the reviews are incredibly valid. I think that, there's definitely a lot to point out about how he kind of writes very much like about women that are kind of like the manic pixie dream girl. I will also say that there is the G slur in there, so that's terrible. And I really, really wish I had not spent, money on this book. I just will put that out there. But as far as like the poems, a lot of the poems in and of itself, I don't think that they were that bad. I don't think that they were worse than a lot of the, usual modern poetry that exists out there. It is generic, but like I think that's in a lot of ways what I was expecting from this maybe. And maybe that's just because it said Instagram poet or whatever. And like even these like stock photos, it's like this is the thing, like this book is not, it's like, it's very straight, it's very white, it's just but did I like hate the poems? No, I would not recommend picking this up. But I didn't have like a terrible experience reading his poems, and I definitely had poems that spoke to me. You can see that, yeah, that spoke to me that I did end up tabbing as well. And I probably will just keep this copy because selling it or like, trading it or like whatever, donating it would only mean that it would get into another person's hands. And I kind of don't want that. So I think I'm just going to keep it. Just think about the great cover. Just keep the couple of, great poems that are in there. But I wouldn't really recommend this because it's nothing special, it's not in any shape or form diverse, and even on the contrary has some problematic elements in there. But do I think that the content is as bad as a lot of people say? No, I don't think so. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. Man, I don't know. Rating poetry collections is for me the most subjective things out of them all, so And then I read 3 poetry collections by Lang Leav, and I have absolutely fallen in love with Lang Leav's poetry. I just think that, she writes poetry that is very, like, it's also different. I feel like she has definitely stuff that's very modern poetry, but then she also has stuff that more reminds me of the more classic poetry, like the things that you would, for me anyway, the things that you would imagine if you think about poetry. And so the first collection that I read was The Universe of Us, and this was my favorite collection that I've read by her. This was a perfect collection of poems for me, and this is the thing, as I said, for me rating these is incredibly subjective, but for me even reading these is so subjective. And I think I said this in my last wrap up as well. I just think that for me anyway, poetry is very much about finding something that I relate to. It's about reading collections at the right time and just kind of reading collections when you need them the most. So for me, it could be that I read this collection in a year or so when I am like in a different place in my life, when I have, different feelings, emotions, have gone through different things. I will read this and it will just not hit as hard. Now, I do still think that a poetry collection that I rated 5-star once is never going to be a poetry collection that I read 1 star, but I just do think that this poetry collection to me was perfect because I read it in a moment in my life where I really, really needed it, where a lot of the poems really hit close to home, where I felt very understood, and with that, it was a really, really healing experience for me. And that is very much what I'm looking for with poetry right now as well. Like, I think why I'm so, into poetry right now is just because I feel so understood reading a lot of these words, and I just love that. Like, it's just so, just finding someone putting all these feelings into, poetry, into words. It feels so good. I just love that so much. I think that it's always just super important to kind of know what kind of poetry you like, in the sense of like not only the way it's written and stuff, if it's like more modern or more classic poetry, but also just like looking at the themes. And I think that if the themes of this poetry collection speak to you, then you should definitely give it a shot. I definitely think that this poetry collection is another one that is a good entry into poetry, just as the Pillow Thoughts poetry collections that I talked about in my last wrap up. And so I would definitely recommend this one, as I would everything else I've read by Lang Leav, but some, again, just hit more close to home than others. But anyway, I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I just think this was such a good poetry collection. Then the other one that I read was Love Looks Pretty on You. Now, this is definitely where I realized that I very much vibe with Lang Leav's poetry. Even though I didn't love this one nearly as much as I love The Universe of Us, I just realized that her poems just work for me. Even if the themes in this one didn't hit as close to home, I just still really enjoyed all of her poems. And I just find so many of her words incredibly healing. And so I just realized that I will probably very much like all of her poetry collections, whether they are about things that, are interesting to me or relatable to me. This definitely had some themes in there of like, abusive relationships and stuff like that. So on the one hand, definitely a trigger warning for that. On the other hand, if you might want something that you can relate to, I think this is definitely for you. I just very much appreciate Lang Leav for putting this into her collections as well, because I think it is kind of easy, quote unquote, to, put things like heartbreak, like falling in love, like friendship, family, all these kinds of themes into your poetry collections, but putting in, super serious topics like, domestic abuse and just generally abusive relationships into your poetry collections, I think that's a whole nother level. And I just very much appreciate Lang Leav for writing about that. So I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars, but again, I would very much recommend it as well. And then finally, I read Love and Misadventure. I think, was this Lang Leav's very first poetry collection? I'm not sure anymore, but definitely I think one of her earlier works. And I think you could kind of tell that, like, it was still written at a time where I think modern poetry already very much existed, but this was definitely, out of the ones that I read, the one that had the most kind of classic poetry. And I still enjoyed it so very much. So this was kind of very good for me to see as well, that I like the different styles of poetry that Lang Leav writes too. I both enjoy the more modern, maybe simpler poems, but I also enjoy, the ones that have the more classic structures and stuff like that. So really, truly this month, I have completely fallen in love with Lang Leav's poetry collections. And I already have some more that I borrowed on Overdrive. I think there are more on Script that I definitely want to read. Like, I cannot wait to read this author's whole catalogue of poetry. And I think that her poetry is pretty popular in general. So if you are someone who reads a lot of poetry and you have read a lot of I know I ask for poetry recommendations all the time at the moment, but I just think that the more I read, the more you could kind of understand my tastes and stuff like that as well. So if you are someone who reads poetry and you know Lang Leav well, and you know other authors that write very similar stuff to Lang Leav and very similar themes, please leave me some recommendations in the comments down below, because again, I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan, and again, I'm definitely going to read everything else that this author has published, but I would also just love to know recommendations of people that maybe write very similar stuff to what she does. Yeah, that is everything that I read in February and March. Again, I just very much wanted to wrap up these 2 months so that I can kind of start fresh in April, and I'm sure I will do an April wrap up. Like, I have confidence in myself that I will definitely have read enough in April to do a wrap up just on April, and then we'll see where life goes after that month. We'll see. But yeah, let me know how your reading is going. Do you kind of use reading as a coping mechanism? I'm definitely finding my way back into it, but I'm still struggling with it a little bit. And I've very much become, a person who journals actually regularly, not just like, I want to do this spread, and then not do any of them, but like I actually do the spreads and I do them in time and not like 3 weeks later. And so that for me has very much become a coping mechanism. And so right now I still very much have to push myself to read, but I think I'm gonna get there where it's gonna be a coping mechanism again. And I'm just super, super excited to really, really get back into reading. But yeah, let me know how your reading has been going. I would really, really love to know. And if you've read anything exciting lately, or maybe if you have also discovered a new genre or a new kind of, you know, like maybe you have started listening to audiobooks, which you've never done before. Like if you've discovered anything new about your reading that has really helped you in the past couple of weeks, I would definitely love to hear about these kinds of things in the comments down below. Again, I hope that you're all staying safe and healthy. And yeah, I make new videos at least once a week. Right now it's kind of working. So click subscribe to never miss anything and hit the little bell so you get notified as well. And thank you so much for watching. I guess I'll see you soon. Bye!